Good morning. Certainly good to see everyone out this morning. We appreciate you being here. A lot of things going on here at Ashland City, and we are so glad that you are willing and wanting to be a part of it. Seth mentioned Friday night. I want to underscore, and it's in the bulletin this way, that is for all ages, whether you are 1 or 101. Just come out, make your plans to come out and fellowship with us. It's going to be a really good time. And also there's a men's prayer breakfast on the 23rd. I want to direct your attention to now so that you can be making plans on being here for that as well. We're going to have a good time of together then as well. But asking a question, and the question is going to sound kind of funny. I don't know if every one of us have heard this question before. I have a feeling Keith has heard this question before. Possibly. But the question is, why are you the way you are? Why are you the way you are? And what I mean by that is, what has shaped you into the person that you are? And good or bad or whatever it is, whatever aspect of our life, what has shaped you to be the way that you are? And the truth is, there's probably a lot of things that have shaped us, right? A lot of things that have formed us and molded us. But one thing I think that we all know is that we are shaped by events. I think we'd all say that's true. We are shaped by events. And they may be events that we have experienced personally, events that we maybe see on television. It could be even events that have happened before we were even born. Whether or not we want to be or we don't want to be, we tend to be shaped by things like the American Revolution. That shaped all of us. Every single one of us, even though it happened long before all of us were born. But there are things also in our lifetimes, things on a national, maybe even an international scale, wars that have happened, assassinations that have happened, pandemics that have happened, terrorist attacks that have happened. All of these things tend to shape us. But also the things that have happened, but the events that have been, the events that are very, very personal for us. Maybe it's a wedding day. Maybe it's the birth of a child. Maybe it's a new job. Maybe it's tragedies that we've experienced. Maybe a health diagnosis, a loss of a loved one. Could be a house fire. All of these events, whether they're big events or small events, whether they're international or national events, whether they're personal events, good events, bad events, we are shaped by events that have happened. But not just events, we're also shaped by the voices that interpret and narrate those events for us. And this part may not be as obvious to us as the other. We're shaped by events. We're by the things that have happened, by the things that we experience, by the things that go on around us. But we're also shaped by the voices that interpret and narrate those events for us. And every time an event happens, someone is there. And sometimes it's you. Sometimes it's me. It's the voice in our own head. But sometimes it's another voice that is there to tell you, this is why this has happened. And sometimes those voices are true and right and good and shaping you in a true and right and good way. Other times those voices are not so helpful. But there's always someone to tell you, this is why this is happening. These events have led up to this. Here's what's going to happen next as a result of this. Someone's always trying to fix this event into a narration, aren't they? trying to interpret it for us, or again, sometimes it's us trying to interpret it for ourselves, to say, this is why this is happening. Here's what's happening in my life. Here's the story that my life is a part of. And this is actually the role that the prophets played in Scripture. Prophets weren't just people who went out and predicted the future. In fact, that was very, very small part of what prophecy actually was. More than anything else, prophets were people that were interpreting and narrating the events that happened and letting people know this is what God says is the interpretation of this event. This is what God says is the narration of this event. Here's where this event came from. Here's why it's happening right now. And here's where it's going to lead. Here are the results. If things don't change, if things stay in their current trajectory, here's where things are going. And that was incredibly helpful to have prophets who were sharing God's perspective. Things that no one else could even know unless God told them. And so a prophet would come to say, here's the proper interpretation, the narration of this event. But there weren't just true prophets, there were also false prophets. And so I want to suggest to you, here's my definition of false prophets. False prophets invoke God's name in order to bolster their credibility and convince people that their worldly narrative comes from God. False prophets invoke God's name in order to bolster their credibility and to convince people that their worldly narrative comes from God. Now, maybe they themselves are convinced that their worldly narrative comes from God, but they're using God's name to say, here's what God thinks about this situation. Here is why this is happening. Here's what led up to this, and here's what will happen because of this. And probably those moments in our lives where we've experienced good things and bad things and challenging things and wonderful things, we've had people around us. And some of them have probably invoked the name of God to tell us, hey, this is why this is happening. And this is what's actually going on in your life. But we also turn on the television, and maybe it's a preacher there that's telling you, here's what God says about what's going on in the world. Or maybe it's a politician who's invoking the name of God to share with you why their worldly perspective is actually from God, in order to convince you that what they're saying, their opinion, their thoughts, their narration, their interpretation is from God. Or maybe it's a talking head on the news. Maybe it's a YouTube influencer. But there are so many people today who invoke the name of God in order to convince people, in order to bolster their credibility, and to convince people that their worldly perspective is actually not from the world, but from heaven. And those interpretations and narrations of events, they're shaping you, and they're shaping me. They're shaping all of us. The voices that we allow to narrate and interpret the events in the world and in our own lives, they are shaping us. And again, some of those interpretations and narrations are helpful, and they're good, and they're from God, and others are not. They are from worldly perspectives. But we are allowing voices to interpret and narrate the events in our lives. And whether those interpretations and narrations are true or false, right or wrong, upside down, right side up, backwards, sideways, they are shaping us. So I want us to spend some time this morning looking at 1 John and asking ourselves, how do we know? How do we know? How do we know what voices are from God and what voices are from the world? How do we know what is the right way to look at what's going on in my life and what's going on out in the world? And what's a worldly way of looking at the events that are happening? The people in John's day, when John was writing back in the first century, they again, we've talked about this each week as we've been in this study, they had a lot of Christians that had been leaving the Christian community. Christians who are no longer faithful to God, no longer committed to Jesus and to his way. And so John is writing this entire book, and he's contrasting. He's contrasting those that are committed and those that are faithful to those that have left the way of Jesus. And the people he's writing to, they are ones who are committed and they're faithful. And hopefully that's exactly like you, committed and faithful. But there were people in their lives, there were people in the world that were trying to influence them in ways that weren't from God. So let's start back, 1 John chapter 3. I want to start at the very end of that chapter, verse 23. He says, "And this is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us." We read that last week. Remember, this is his commandment, singular. This is his commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us. Whoever keeps his commandments abides in God, and God in him. And by this we know that he abides in us, by the Spirit whom he has given us. The Spirit of God is our seal. It is our mark that we belong to God, that we're God's people. And this is how we know that we are in him and that he is in us. But the Spirit of God is not just for us and our own reassurance, but it's also that we listen to people who have the Spirit. Are we making sure that the people we're listening to, the people whose advice that we're taking, the people that we're allowing to shape the way that we think, the people who are shaping the way that we interpret the good things that happen in our life, and then to interpret the bad things that happen in our life, are we making sure that those voices are Spirit-filled voices, that those people are Spirit-filled people? Are we discerning whether or not the wisdom is worldly wisdom, or is it wisdom from God? But here's what he says in 1 John 4 and verse 1. "Beloved, do not believe every spirit. Do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world." And again, there were a lot of people that had gone out from the church in Ephesus. And now they're influencing the world and influencing the other people. And John wants to make sure that we faithful believers, that we're holding on, and that we're committed, and that we're staying true. And so he says, be careful that you don't believe every spirit, but that you test. And that's a good word, isn't it? To test. Literally to critically evaluate. John says you critically evaluate every spirit. Test to see whether this spirit is from God, whether this person is literally animated. Everybody is animated by something, aren't they? Everybody that's moving and talking and doing and going, something is animating them. Something is moving them. If a boat is out, if a sailboat is moving across the water, guess what? Something is pushing it. Something is moving it. And if somebody's speaking to you and they're giving you advice and they're telling you what you should do and they're telling you how we should think about certain things, here's how you should think about the world. Here's how you should think about the present. Here's how you should think about the future. If they're telling us something, then something is moving them, is animating them. And it's our responsibility to test whether or not they're animated by the Spirit of God or whether or not they're animated by the spirit of the world. And we have to discern. We have to critically evaluate what sort of spirit is animating them. Look at verse 2. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, or literally the anti-Messiah, which you heard was coming and now is in the world already. Now, granted, this isn't the only test. It's not even the only test in 1 John for whether or not someone is speaking from God, but it's an important test. What does this person who's speaking, what do they say about Jesus? What does this person say about Jesus specifically? Probably in John's day, they're asking questions here like, is this person a Gnostic? That is, do they believe that the world is corrupt and everything that is physical is just evil and bad? Do they believe that Jesus did not come in the flesh? They could be asking, are they docetic? Are they someone who doesn't believe in the humanity of Jesus? But the big question is, what does this person say about Jesus? I mean, do we ever just stop and think about that some of the people that have the greatest impact, the greatest influence on our lives don't even confess the truth about Jesus? The people that we're allowing to shape our mentality, the people we're allowing to shape how we interpret the events in the world or how we interpret our own personal events, the people who are having the biggest influence on us do not confess the truth about Jesus. And that's a problem, is it not? It doesn't mean we need to hate these people and ostracize these people and just avoid everyone who doesn't know the truth about Jesus. I mean, he's not saying don't be friends with these kind of people. But we have to ask, are we sitting at their feet and letting them teach us and mold us? We need to be stopping and asking ourselves, what does this person believe about Jesus? Does this person know and believe the truth and confess the truth about Jesus? Look at verse 4. He says, little children, you are from God and have overcome them, for he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are from the world, therefore they speak from the world, and the world listens to them. Now this may not come as a shock, but the world is going to listen to worldly wisdom, right? The world listens to worldly wisdom. It resonates with them. And so when when false teachers are teaching worldly things, this resonates with the world. It makes perfect sense to them. They say, yeah, of course, that's common sense. Everybody knows that. Why are they saying that? Because the wisdom that they're sharing, the wisdom that they're teaching, the way they're presenting things, it makes perfect sense because it comes from the world. And John already has told us what comes from the world. Back in chapter 2 and verse 16, what comes from the world? The desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and the pride of life. I like the way the New Living Translation actually puts this. The New Living Translation says, craving for physical pleasure, craving for everything that your eyes see, craving for more and more that you need. The pride of life, the pride in who you are, the pride in what you have, the pride in what you have accomplished. Now, I want us just to kind of sit and camp out right here just for a second. Let's think about this. I mean, how often do we hear people, preachers, teachers, politicians, talking heads, whomever it may be, how often do we hear people invoke the name of God to promote worldly wisdom? Invoke the name of God as if this message is from God, or as if God endorses this message, a message that is purely worldly, promoting the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life. I mean, it's not hard to sort of turn around and see what's happening around us sometimes, is it? That there are people invoking the name of God in order to endorse, to affirm what the Bible calls, for instance, sexual immorality. And when someone invokes the name of God to endorse sexual immorality, they're promoting a message that is from the world. And again, it's not hard to look around, see people who are invoking the name of God to endorse a message of greed and covetousness, to encourage people to accumulate just more and more stuff as if that's the will of God for their lives. As if the Bible doesn't say over and over and over again how wrong greed and covetousness are. But it makes sense to people. And it resonates with people. Why? Because it's from the world. I mean, let's be honest. We always talk about them. let's be honest, it resonates with me. Why? Because it appeals to my flesh. It appeals to my eyes. It appeals to my pride. And again, we turn around and over again, we hear people that in the name of God are encouraging us to be proud. Proud of who we are and proud of where we came from and proud of what we have and proud of what we know and proud of what we've done. This is not from God. This is from the world. But it makes sense to us. It resonates with us because it appeals to our flesh and it appeals to our eyes. And it appeals to our pride. It appeals to our pleasure. And John's warning them. Yeah, they're teachers that have gone out into the world and they're leading people astray. The world is going to listen to them. Why? Because they're from the world, and the things that they're saying, it appeals to their pride and to their pleasure and to their passions. So is it any wonder that we want to believe those messages? These messages that appeal to our pride, that appeal to our passions, that appeal to our fleshly self. And then they turn around and they promise us that God endorses them, that God signs off on them. And we have to be very skeptical, especially about the messages that we want to believe. The ones that appeal to us, that resonate with us. We have to stop and say, whoa. Is that from God or is that from the world? Look at verse 6. He says, we're from God. Whoever knows God listens to us. Whoever is not from God does not listen to us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. And now I think John is specifically talking about himself and the other apostles here. Saying we, as in the apostles, those men who walked with Jesus, those who knew Jesus, those who are preaching his original gospel message. He says, we are from God, and this is how we know. Whether or not someone is of the truth, whether or not someone is of error, whether or not they listen to the apostles. We know whether or not they are in agreement with the apostles. And we could use this same test today, can't we? I mean, I hear it all the time. I hear people just explicitly say, well, Paul was wrong about that. Or, reading the New Testament, and here they are reading the New Testament, and they're saying, Paul was wrong about that. Or, you know what, I disagree with Paul on that point. And John over there, he doesn't know what he's talking about. Wait a minute. Do we understand that when we disagree with the teachings of the apostles, that we are disagreeing with Jesus? Because Jesus anointed them. He deputized them to go into the world, and to proclaim the message of the cross, and not only the events of the cross, but to narrate the cross, and to interpret the cross, and to tell the world this is what the cross means. This is what the empty tomb means. This is how you live as a follower of Jesus. And when someone says, well, yes, I want Jesus, I want salvation, and I want to be with him forever, but I don't want to listen to the teachings of the apostles, John says this is how we know that they're not telling the truth. If someone is not willing to listen to the teachings of the apostles, then they're not listening to Jesus, because Jesus deputized them to go and preach this message. And so this becomes a test for us as well. I just want to stop just for a moment, just for a minute. And let's take a look at the whole book of 1 John. We've gone through several chapters now, but I want us to look at 1 John as a whole and ask what are the characteristics of false teachers as John is sort of kind of laying it out for his audience. Because I think it's going to be helpful for us as well. If we're going to be able to discern who is of the truth and who is of error, who has the spirit of truth and who is speaking from a spirit of error, then we need to pay attention to these characteristics of false prophets. And number one, John says that they claim to know God but make a practice of sinning. In fact, John would say this, will say this over and over and over again. And it's not to say that false prophets mess up and no one else messes up. That's not what John is saying. But John has never made that case. But he says if you're truly following Jesus, Of course you're going to make mistakes. Of course you're going to fall short. Of course you're going to sin. But the people that claim to be followers of Jesus, the people that claim to know God, but they make a lifestyle out of a practice, out of sinning, they're not of God. They walk in darkness. They don't keep His commandments. They don't walk in the way Jesus walked. And number two, they say they have no sin. And again, this is an indication of someone who is not of the truth. If someone says, I don't need to be forgiven of anything, I don't need to confess anything, I'm right with God, what I do is right with God, I never mess up, I'm on the right path, I don't make these kinds of mistakes, and I don't sin, that's an indication of their pride. It's an indication of their arrogance, and that is not of God. And we need to be very careful who we're allowing to shape us. Those people that speak with the Spirit of God are willing to confess and say, I've messed up, I've made mistakes, I've sinned, I've fallen short. Don't follow me, you follow Jesus. Number three, they insist that they love God, but they hate their brother. Over and over again in 1 John, he says, if anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he's a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. Someone who says, I love God, but I hate those people over there. I hate this group of Christians right over here. I hate those people. They're not speaking from God. Number four, they love the world and the things in the world. And again, things like the lust of the flesh, lust of the eyes, the pride of life. Number five, they deny fundamental truth about Jesus. Maybe they're denying His deity. Maybe they're denying His humanity. Maybe they're denying His lordship. But finally, number six, that we just talked about, they don't listen to the apostles' teaching. Someone is shaping you. Someone is influencing you. And chances are there are a lot of people shaping you and teaching you and influencing you. I mean, I stand up here every week and I'm teaching, but check me, test me, critically examine not just what I'm saying, but my life. That doesn't mean I'm perfect, far from it. But if I ever claim to be perfect, cast me out. Because I better be confessing to you and to the Lord that I'm not. And if anyone claims to be perfect, that's a person that we need to stop listening to. But everyone who teaches you, influences you, shapes you, test them, and ask, is this person speaking with the Spirit of truth, with the Spirit of God, or is this person speaking from a spirit of error? Evaluate, test, discern. In fact, I love the word discern. Learn to discern. That's what we all have to do, isn't it? Learn to discern the spirit of truth from the spirit of error. Learn to discern the spirit of truth from the spirit of error. And John lays it out for us. This is exactly what we have to do. And you and I, we live in an age, again, we have more voices and more noise probably than have ever been. We have those little phones right in our pocket. They call them smartphones, but sometimes I don't know how smart they actually are. But we've got them. And we've got televisions. No telling how many channels with voices, ideas, interpretations of the world. And a lot of those people are invoking the name of God in order to boost their credibility and to convince us that their narration and interpretation is from God rather from the world. In church, we've got to be wise. We have to be wise, whether it's a friend that's taking us aside and putting their arm around us and saying, hey, here's why this is happening. God wants you to do this. God wants you to know that. Or if it's someone standing in the pulpit or somebody on the television, we have to test. We have to discern. We have to be wise. We have to learn to discern the difference between the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. Now, that doesn't mean we're going to always agree on everything. It doesn't mean that if everybody is speaking the truth and we're all walking by the Spirit, that we'll never have a difference of opinion. Of course not. There's going to be a lot of things that we're going to disagree about, but we need to agree about what's important. We're going to agree about who Jesus is and what his life means and what his death means and what his resurrection means, what the future holds for God's people and how we're to walk faithfully in him. There are a lot of voices in the world, and we have to learn to discern from the spirit of truth, from the spirit of error. And maybe there's someone here this morning, and maybe you're ready to respond to Jesus. This whole year, everything we've been talking about is our loyalty to Jesus, being loyal to Jesus, responding to the grace of God, the unmerited favor of God with an unwavering and unshakable commitment. And maybe you're ready to pledge your commitment to Jesus, to pledge your loyalty, to pledge your allegiance to him, to be buried with him in baptism, to be raised up to walk in newness of life, a new life, a life of walking in the light. And again, that doesn't mean you're going to be perfect. It doesn't mean that you're never going to make mistakes. You're going to make mistakes. But the call is to be faithful. You don't have to be perfect. You have to be faithful. You don't have to be perfect. You have to be loyal. You don't have to be perfect. You have to be committed. And you have to remain committed to Jesus and remain committed to walking in his ways. And maybe you're ready to put Jesus on in baptism, experience that forgiveness. Maybe you made that commitment a long time ago, and you find yourself now needing to recommit yourself to Jesus and to his people. And you need for us to pray for you, to encourage you. Maybe you're looking at your life and you realize that there have been some voices that have been shaping you, that have been leading you, that have been discipling you, but they haven't been leading you toward Jesus. They've been leading you toward the desires of the flesh and the desires of the eyes and the pride of life. And you need to make changes. You need to repent. And you can make that decision whether you tell any of us or not. But it's important to confess our sins to each other, to pray for one another, to find somebody to talk about that with, to confess that to pray with you. So no matter what your need is, make this your invitation as together we stand and sing.